Hello and welcome back to the reworking series, where we try to put every single weapon in the game in the most optimal spot, breaking it down by class with things like rebalancing them or giving them a new kit. Today, we are talking about Sloshers. Some of the base Sloshers we've seen since Splatoon 1 don't have a lot to talk about. However, when we get to some of the newer ones, mainly Blob and Explo, there is a lot of interesting stuff to work with, so I think this is going to be a very fun episode. So with that being said, subscribe if you want to see more weapon class breakdowns from me, and let's get started. So let's start by talking about the vanilla Slosher and Slosher Deco. Now the main weapon of Slosher doesn't really need any changes. It got a major one a bit back, capping its fall off damage at 50, ensuring it is a consistent 2-shot, and because of that, the main weapon has been in a pretty good spot. However, both its kits are a little bit lacking. Tri-Strike lacks continuation, the ability to go in as a Slosher, a Slayer weapon, and then pop the special to continue what you're doing. It's still not bad by any means, but this is Slosher's best kit, and it struggled to see too much use so far. Definitely enough to be viable, but I wouldn't say it's in the ideal state. And the Deco kit, while more interesting with Zipcaster, now has a problem of the sub-weapon of Dart, meaning that it has very little to do without map control and struggles to get that valuable special. So I think this is an obvious candidate for a third kit, which we'll be doing for quite a few of these. For Soda Slosher, I'd like to bring back properties of two previous Sloshers. One would be the Burst Bomb combos on Vanilla Slosher in Splatoon 1. I got every bucket player too hopeful with that line, I'm not giving it Burst Bomb. Instead, I'm gonna give it Torpedo. You still have combos with it, pretty insane ones given how good Rolled Torpedo is, along with some extra utility to find people for a weapon that struggles with it, without having as insanely broken burst combos as Splatoon 1 Slosher. I think this is a good compromise and really powerful on its own, and I'm gonna make it even better by giving it Crab Tank. It had Baller and Kraken before, and I think Crab Tank would be a good way to reference that in a new way. You could still pop it as a means of continuation since it gives you some HP and can be used for aggression, kind of similar to how Splash would use it if it's being aggressive. However, it also gives you the chance to use it more defensively. This kit gives Bucket a ton of flexibility, tools that work well with it, and insane combos and kit synergy between the main, sub, and special, which I think would put it in a great spot. Just make it 210p so it's not too broken. Anyway, try Slosher's up next. While this weapon could be a little bit annoying with how much range it has for a short range counter, it's honestly in a pretty healthy spot with its Tri Nouveau kit, and I can't really think of any changes it super needs. So we're gonna leave this one as is. Sloshing Machine, on the other hand, I want to do a slight rework. In terms of where it's at right now in the game, it's in a pretty ideal spot balance-wise, being a high to almost top tier weapon at the moment. However, I think the 5-frame and lag nerf they did with it makes the weapon feel a lot worse than it actually is. This rework is to keep it in the same spot but have the weapon feel a little bit better. So one small buff and nerf. For the buff, we're gonna give it 2 frames back, so the nerf will now be a 3-frame nerf when all is said and done. This will make the weapon a little bit faster and more flexible in all attributes, while still being slower and needing to rely on angles more compared to the original machine. To compensate, we're gonna reduce the area of effect of the outside hit by 4%, making it so it's just a slightly tighter hitbox that requires a little bit more accuracy. I think these changes keep it in pretty much the same spot, but feel a lot better while being a little bit less annoying. And since it has 2 solid kits, I think this is a nice change for it. Skipping ahead of Expo and Blob, since we have a lot to talk about with those, let's real quick cover Dread. Originally, I thought Dreadringer was a lot like a range blaster, but instead of having a one-shot direct, it only did 90 damage, which, while it does have some unique bucket angles, I thought was a big problem. However, now I think it's clear to see it has one more strength to make up for that, which is its insane painting ability. So I think it could be really interesting to rework this as a support. There is another route, which is give it Burst Bomb, but I think we need more cooler options in the game, and I think it would be different than Try. My idea would be to give it Spot Bomb Tacticooler. Spot Bomb would still give it a lethal bomb to poke, and nothing with Cooler has it right now. On top of that, it's still fast enough to play off of as a combo number with 90 damage Sloshers, and it would be able to get plenty of Tacticooler as well as be able to go in and use it, being a unique cooler option that leans a bit more to aggression while having cool bucket angles to play off of, which I think would be a playstyle we don't have right now. Before we get to Blob, let's start with Explosher. While Explo is a very solid main weapon, it has struggled a lot more in Splatoon 3 for 2 main reasons. One, it doesn't really have a kit that allows it to deal with some of the more powerful specials. As horrible as Custom Explosher's exclusive Heavy Baller was, that kit still allowed you to be able to survive things like Inkjet or Stingray or being missiled in a bad situation or even just being rushed down. In Splatoon 3, this is even more of a problem, not just with chargers on hallway maps, but Zuka Tryzuka, Crab, and Jetpack are all horrible for Slosher to deal with. Jetpack in general was already bad in Splatoon 2, but is now an even more worse matchup. You don't just have to hit 2 mid-air hits, you have to hit them basically back to back or they can heal between. So while its kit right now seems more solid than it was in Splatoon 2, it needs to have something that can help it against those specials. I think we'll buff it a little bit to do better against those, though we're going to be really careful not to buff the main weapon too much in other areas. Let's start with the buff to the weapon. We're going to be increasing the shot velocity by 33%. This makes it travel slightly faster. We're not doing a huge increase, but this will help with targeting things like Tryzuka, Inkjet in the sky especially if it has to go for a hit, or trying to hit things like Crab Tank. Of course, it's still good against other players, and given that it's a trapping weapon, this is a very big buff, but it's done in a small enough amount where I think it helps with the increased speed of Splatoon 3 without being too much. The second buff is exclusively against specials. Currently, it doesn't have any extra damage multiplier to Crab and Booyah Bomb, which is 6 hits to destroy it, if you hit all directs. This is going to be buffed to 1.5 times damage, being 4 hits to destroy it if you hit every single direct. Object Shredder is 1.3 and 1.1 against Booyah respectively, which will be buffed to 1.86, giving it just enough damage to 3-shot Crab Tanks and Booyah Bombs. Now, even with that, it's still not going to be great against those, particularly Booyah, because your ability to hit both the shot and the explosion on it is going to be pretty rare, but it does mean that if you're fighting with a teammate, you should be able to break it, and against Crab, it'll be helpful with teammates and possibly able to break it on its own. I think this still keeps the specials as countering it, but tones back the matchup severity significantly enough to where Explo isn't bullied as hard. With that being said, I think it could use a little bit more, especially for use outside of zones. Let's give it a second kit with Ink Mine for combos, location, as well as being able to hold down objectives. Close second to Beacon, but I really think Mine plays a little bit better with this weapon given the limited mobility. And for the special weapon, another Crab Tank. Really, it's the perfect candidate. Not only can this be a solid special to get in and paint on its own right with the secondary fire that's basically a buffed Slosher mode, but the ball form can be exceptionally useful to live these specials. Of course, it still gets shredded, but it can allow you to stall long enough, just like S2 Baller did. It even has a similar speed to how that special felt, so I think this will be an insanely fun and cool looking kit. Alright, let's get to Blob Lobber. The main problem with Blob is if we made it really good, this weapon would be horrible for the game. This is the best weapon at sitting back and painting and special spamming, which right now already does a lot, but just isn't good enough to succeed due to other problems the weapon has, such as being rushed down or struggling against certain specials. So I'm going to do possibly the most drastic rework of this entire series. Let's get the nerfs out of the way first. The main weapon's ink consumption is going to be increased by 20%. It's still going to paint as well as it does now, but you're not going to be able to spam it. There will be reasonable cooldowns, especially if you're using your sub-weapon. And secondly, Blob currently uses all 4 sloshes even if it dies partway through. This is a lot smaller of a thing, but I think this mechanic is just really dumb. It kind of just punishes players who are doing the right thing into Blob. So now when Blob dies, it stops spawning any more blobs. Alright though, that's some significant nerfs. So what are the buffs? First off, we're going to increase its damage from 30 to 31. This will help with combos a little bit, as well as a bit better object damage, and this is especially important with Ink Storm, since 3 hits doing 93 instead of 90 damage will let it combo a little bit sooner. It's not quite as good as its old object damage before the nerf, but it's enough to make it a bit better. The main buff, however, is a lot more drastic. The shot velocity of the blobs, how fast they travel, will be increased by 250% before the first bounce and by 175% in the second bounce. That is 2.5 times and 1.75 times respectively. After the second bounce, it'll bounce the same speed as normal. This drastic speed increase will make it significantly easier to go for one-taps or hitting opponents rushing you down, meaning Blob Lobber up close to an enemy can actually fight way better in this version. And even at closer to mid-range values, the first plus second blobs traveling faster means it's much more likely to hit an opponent. This does reduce how long the blobs linger, but its paint is going to happen a bit more quickly and it's going to be much better at fighting. This also means if you target things like specials, you're going to have an easier time hitting them, such as Crab. I think this buff allows it to play more fight heavy and in more aggressive positions, meaning I think it will be more flexible, fun, and healthy to play with and against. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys would change about Sloshers in the comments down below, and if you liked my Blob rework. I will see you all next time.